I've just finished a fantastic 16-night cruise as a solo traveler, and while it's still fresh in my mind, I wanted to talk about how I manage my sleep, my food, and generally keeping the overwhelm at bay while on a cruise ship. If you're a solo traveler, cruises are so easy to arrange and so structured compared to doing your own independent travel, so it's a really nice alternative. I hear from a lot of people that they're really worried about the chaos and the noise and the crowds, but I'm here to help. This is the fourth video in a series where I talk about traveling as a solo adult, probably a woman, potentially midlife, and probably neurodivergent. If you don't know me, I'm Lisa. I'm currently a full-time traveler. I'm a late diagnosed autistic ADHDer. I'm an introvert that loves people, and I'm also a travel coach, consultant, and researcher. Definitely have to mention the nausea and the motion sickness factor, or seasickness. So normally it's not an issue at all. These cruise ships, they are huge, they have stabilizers, and they try to get the smoothest sea possible. There was an issue on day 3. Essentially, there was some rough weather, so much so that they canceled the port stop, which is kind of a drag, but it was indeed bad. So I think day 3, I spent most of it lying flat. That's the best place for me personally to avoid any motion sickness. You know, you can, at the start of the cruise, it can be overstimulating, so it was kind of nice just to be able to rest. So I had my wristbands, I had my ginger candies, but actually I had the ones that had turmeric in it, and they turn your tongue yellow. So maybe get the plain ones, or the candied ginger. That's the best. I didn't have motion sickness tablets, but maybe that would have been good to have. What I found quite useful was the lemon and ginger tea. This cruise, they had that tea stocked buffet areas where the hot drinks are. I noticed, though, that they just disappeared. I suspect that maybe people were taking a whole bunch of them, and so the crew hid them. That meant that I had to hunt it down. So when I got to the next port stop, I actually bought my own ginger lemon tea because honestly, and it really, really did help with the nausea. The other solo cruisers noticed me walking around with my purple travel mug a lot. It's like, yeah, it's tea. Next, I'll talk about the noise and I guess some of the visual overwhelm. They can often be kind of hand in hand. So for me, the noisiest areas of the ship were the casino while it was open. When it was closed, it was very bright, but there was no noise. The other noisy areas could be the pool deck if they were playing lots of loud music. Otherwise, not too much of an issue. In terms of shows, I didn't go to that many shows, but if I did, I'd sit in the back, and that also cuts down on some of the visual overwhelm. In terms of crowds and people, I think the cruise lines do a pretty good job of controlling the need for like long lines. I know that's not always the case, and some of my other solo cruisers had mentioned times where the line was really, really long to get off the ship or get back on the ship. I didn't personally experience that. In terms of the social activities, I really did pace myself. I always give myself lots of breaks as well. Sometimes I would even make up an excuse that I forgot something in my room. Well, if I'm honest, I probably really did forget something in my room, but it meant that I could just step away, have a little stroll by myself, decompress slightly, but then go back and get back into it. I wasn't part of the nightclub aspect of it very often. I think maybe just twice. Yeah, it's whatever you're comfortable with. In terms of the solo group, everyone was really fantastic. There was so many solos that there was actually different groups that formed and different WhatsApp groups. On my previous cruise, there weren't nearly as many solos. We didn't need to create a WhatsApp group because Royal Caribbean has messaging, whereas Norwegian does not. So it meant that people who had the Wi-Fi had an advantage because they could keep messaging, and a lot of us were only able to have a connection when we were close enough to shore. A lot of times you have to go back to the old-fashioned way of doing things, which is like agreeing a time and a place to meet somebody, which felt weird, but it works really, really well. And then when you get to know people, you can just give them your cabin number, tell them to meet you at your cabin. That works really well too. And then in terms of the social aspect of dining, so I'll talk about the food specifically in a bit, but there were a lot of times when I just ate in the buffet by myself. I even ate in the main dining room by myself a few times. There's just something really relaxing about just putting in your AirPods and listening to a podcast or going through whatever it is you want to do, but doesn't involve conversation. So that was nice. But other times I went to group dinners, I had one-on-one dinners, however it worked out, and it's fine. I want to know, what are your biggest fears about cruising? Like, what's holding you back? Let me know in the comments below. This is the one that's weird to talk about, but smells. So for me personally, smells can trigger either headaches or nausea. A couple areas where I had struggles was the duty-free shops and then like the rear of the ship. So in the duty-free, you have all of the perfumes and they're strong. Sometimes even like the smell of fabric chemicals is pretty unpleasant as well, and that can give me feelings of nausea. So I definitely avoided the duty-free shop area as well, mostly based on smell. But it is on the same floor as the casino, so sometimes I would just not go to that floor at all. And then one of the least pleasant aspects was that the rear of the ship smelled like toilets, or, well, in the UK we would say drains, but it means the same thing. So it's just a very unpleasant smell. I love walking on the promenade deck, and sometimes I would use that to get to the back of the ship rather than going through some of the busier public interior areas, just because it was nice to get some fresh air, some daylight, that type of thing. The very back of the ship, sometimes you just had to hold your breath. I don't know what that's about. I'm not picking on Norwegian Sun. I'm just saying it happened. And even tried cutting through the side doors at the rear, but honestly, the smell was still there. So who knows where the source was. It was definitely an inconvenience, but it didn't take away from the overall experience, which was really positive. I mean, I'd say overall, there's a lot of fresh air coming in because people are always opening the doors to the outside. So, even though you have air circulating and the inside is climate controlled, you still get a lot of fresh air. So yeah, it was fine. I guess lastly, it's worth mentioning that some of the workers of the ship were painting the outside of the ship as part of their maintenance. And marine paint is a really strong chemical smell. So if I ever saw them, I just try not to go anywhere near them. Yeah. In terms of the visual overload, not too much of an issue. If there's a show, I usually sit at the back. Also means if it's like a comedian or something, you're less likely to get involved. Towards the middle, my cabin messiness was getting annoying to me, so I started developing more of a routine to keep it in check. So there's so much storage, I just keep stuff in drawers or just in cupboards, so that seemed to be fine. The more visually stimulating places, like I mentioned, the casino, there's a lot of flashing lights, also the bells and I just didn't go in there if I thought it was going to be an issue. Lastly, let's talk about the food. I'd say overall it was a really consistent experience. Within the buffet area, there were items of food that were almost always there. So things like burgers or cookies and salad. So lots of consistent, always watermelon, pineapple, apples. In the morning, there was always bananas. If I had more time and I was in the mood for it, I would definitely go to the formal main dining room space. That was sometimes really nice, not to have to deal with the buffet. The menu items definitely rotated each day, but there were also items that were always available. The main dining room is just a little bit more peaceful. I think the only issue I ever had was that there was some sunlight. The sun was setting and it was coming in, it was blinding me, but that was fine. One of the things I did experience on Royal Caribbean was the staff coming through and kind of doing like singing or conga lines, and it just was so annoying and so unnecessary for my neurodivergent brain. I didn't experience any of that on Norwegian, so very glad for that. The only thing I would say about the main dining room breakfast specifically is that the food would be served and it was often cold. So I don't think that happened too many times in the main dining room for dinner time. And I mentioned I went to 2 specialty dinners and the food was impeccable both times. So yeah. When you haven't slept, everything is terrible. I mean, everything. I try as much as I can to get 8 hours of sleep. It doesn't always work. And when it comes to sleep, there are some things you can control and there's some things you can't control. The same is in any environment, but particularly on a cruise ship. I'm going to break down what you can do to help maximize your sleep. First is setting up a more comfortable cabin environment. So making sure the temperature is right. I also am pretty careful about blocking out the light sources. The biggest ones that I experienced on this last one was the light from underneath the door, the light coming through the peephole, and then my window. Inside cabins have no windows, and they're often the cheapest, so probably I'm just going to book inside cabins from now on. Unless there's a really good price on a balcony and it's a cruise where it's worth having a balcony, like if there's going to be some really beautiful scenery outside. It's just water, then no, I'm not going to bother. For the curtains, just closing them isn't always enough. There can be like movement. So I worked out that I could take my portable clothesline and clip it closed at intervals, shall we say. And I sometimes would just put a pillow on the window's edge just to seal the bottom. So I'm sure something else could have gone just to kind of seal off the bottom area. And then for the peephole, the view hole or the spy hole, the peephole, door viewer, it took me a while to be like, this is what's bothering me. The easiest thing was just stick a Band-Aid on there. I've also seen people use things like paint, like the blue painter's tape or a Post-it note, but I feel like the Band-Aid is probably the easiest, and it definitely stays on. The light under the door didn't bother me from my bed because when I was lying flat, I couldn't see it. But I think other room layouts, it might have that problem. So just something to bear in mind. You might need to put something down to keep the light from coming in. One of the other possible issues is if you are a napper, your room attendant coming to clean when you might be sleeping. So on the doors of this particular cruise ship, you could say like, please clean my room, or do not disturb, or welcome, which I guess is the neutral. And so that could be really useful. I feel like a lot of the room attendants want to do most of the cleaning in the morning, but they will come back in the afternoon on this particular cruise ship. Some other cruise ships actually have room attendants coming in twice a day. So either way, if you think you're going to be napping, it feels like that might be worth having a conversation with them to align on timing. The other things I like to make sure I have are just any comfort item. I personally don't travel with a weighted blanket, but I did notice that it's like a blanket that they put at the foot of the bed to protect the bedding from dirty wheels of suitcase. That's pretty heavy. That would make a really good substitute weighted blanket. Otherwise, sometimes I just sleep with a pillow on my stomach. Definitely, feel free to bring as many comfort items as you need for your sleep. You really don't have to travel light when you're on a cruise because there's so much assistance available for your luggage. Obviously, it goes without saying, like, try to keep to your usual night routine, your sleep hygiene. On the cooler nights, I really liked getting herbal tea. So I brought some with me, and then I actually bought some more at a port stop. It definitely seemed like there was hot water always available in the buffet style areas. So that was really nice. So in terms of other disruptions, it's definitely quieter when you're at sea. When you're coming into port, there can be a lot of noise. And so some of the earlier ones were around 6 a.m. I could hear mechanical things moving on the ship as maybe an anchor was being an anchor was being lowered or a door was being, moved out, something like that. Usually there's no tannoy announcements between, I think, maybe 9 p.m. and 9 a.m., but that can change based on where you are. When you arrive at a port, they'll definitely announce when they're getting ready to open the doors if people want to leave. And so there'll be announcements for that. And then, of course, on the last day when everybody's disembarking, there's announcements probably every 10 minutes because they're just trying to get everybody off the ship. In my previous message, I also said to have a look at the deck plan. And if you want, you can pay. Usually you have to pay to choose your exact cabin, but you can choose to have a cabin that's away from any sources of noise that you think might become annoying to you. So things like public spaces, elevators, that type of thing. On this particular cruise, I let them choose my cabin location. I was an outside cabin, pretty far forward, so there was a fair amount of movement, I have to say. Generally, it's quite nice. The deck I was on, no complaints. I had cabins above me, below me, on both sides, so I slept really well from that point of view. The next video in the series will be a look at my cabin and how I set it up for my sensory needs. Well, I'll link that here, and in the meantime, if that video isn't out yet, I'll just link a series that I made about cruising. That's all I've got for now. If you think of anything, or if you have any questions or any comments, please put those in the... You know what to do.